Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, here with Keith Myers. Keith, talk to me. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. It's a day that's not going to be a billion degrees like it has been the last week, and I'm sitting here talking Seahawk football and drinking some good coffee. It's a great start to my day today. How are you?
What's your go-to coffee?
My go-to coffee is I have a Keurig, so it brews 1 cup at a time, so it's all those little cups. And the one that I've decided that I like, that I tend to buy more often than not, is it's called Caribou, which it's from Canada, of course, right, with that name. And
That's good, solid.
Yeah, what I've been told is that Caribou is like Starbucks, but in Canadian. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I do like their K-Cup coffee. It's tasty and caffeinated, and without it, I have a hard time waking up. So I need something. Gotta have the caffeine.
I've been a Keurig guy off and on in the past. My wife has had one, and she keeps it in her office, and so I get a cup occasionally. And then I've tried that before. That's really good. Currently, right now, they sell this organic coffee at Costco called Jose's Coffee, and it's just a general. I think it's Colombian, but it's just a medium roast, and I'm just a black coffee guy, so it's pretty solid for me.
Yeah, I'm a black coffee guy. I usually
brew it I brew it full strength, and the Jose's is not terribly heavy bitter. It's just a medium, so that strong but medium is my right in my pocket. How am I doing, dude? The weather. Speaking of the weather, it's been the hottest summer in Phoenix history, and I'm a part of it. We've had now. So a few days ago, it was 8 days over 115. Yesterday we broke that, so it's 9 days over 115. I don't think it's supposed to get that hot today. I think it's like 112 or something like that. So, but it's
as if that matters.
Yeah, I know. I looked at the 14-day forecast. 14 days straight forecasted above 110.
Oh my God.
Like 110, 111, 112. It doesn't get above 112, but it's all right there. Crazy.
The thing is, we are late enough in the year that I'm surprised that the monsoons haven't come and helped you out.
I know. Last night we had hope. It got real dark. The clouds came in. All the thunder heads had built up over the mountains locally all day, and then it unleashed, but it didn't hit us. So we saw lightning. We experienced the flash of lightning. We heard the rumble and the roar of the thunder. But the actual storm and rain, any rain to speak of at all, missed us, by a long shot. So we remained dry and warm last night. It was crazy. So I have my fingers crossed for today, but who knows?
Yep.
It's got a 15% chance of rain in the afternoon. So, football, dude.
Football. Let's talk about Seahawks.
Let's talk some football. Yeah, that's why we're here. So. The Seahawks are coming into officially kind of week 3 of training camp. We were trying to figure out exactly how many practices they've had before the show, but they spent the first week just getting players in, testing for COVID, with no real. I mean, they didn't even have classroom stuff for the first 3 days, and then after that, it was just classroom stuff, on the field walkthroughs, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Since then, they've moved on to walkthroughs. And running drills and so forth with just helmets on, no pads. And then yesterday was the very first Seahawks practice of 2020 with full pads and a little bit of contact and a whole lot of lot of practice, a whole lot of play. It was kind of fun. Did you watch it on Seahawks.com?
I actually didn't. I really wanted to get on and watch that practice, and then just got busy with other stuff and missed it. So a lot of what I've got is people who I have noticed their opinions kind of match mine when we watch practice, that I'm just kind of relying on their opinions because I didn't get a chance to watch it yesterday. I'm really hoping to get on and get a chance to see the rest of the practices from here on out. So that would be
No, we're
great.
all kind of in the same boat. I mean, if you've got a media credentialed pass and you can get into the VMac, good on you. Let us know what's going on because we are not there.
Yeah, I miss those days. Those were fun practices to go in and.
Before practice on Monday, Pete Carroll had a news conference. He talked about kind of where everything was at up until that point. He mentioned a lot of players. I thought we'd go through those just a little bit and kind of gauge some reaction together as to how we feel about it. LJ Collier, he came out prominently mentioning LJ Collier. He said that he was out of shape coming in as a rookie. Hadn't heard that yet before. It was kind of assumed a little bit, but then he got injured and we just never really got back to that. He said he looks totally different though. Quicker. These are Pete Carroll's words: quicker, explosive, great shape, ready to battle, off to a terrific start. I guess that's great news. I mean, we all expected that we'd see a little bump in LJ Collier. I think he gave an interview earlier this summer that stated he's kind of ticked off, not only at himself, but just in general, that he didn't do more last year. And he was really looking forward to showing out this year. And it sounds like he's at least off to a good start.
Yeah. The other one that was really interesting to hear him talk about was Brian Monet, who has slimmed down as well. Carroll said he was 350 last year. I've heard 360. In fact, I think he was listed as 360. Down to 340, looking, just a little quicker. And Pete Carroll was really excited about some of the stuff that he's been doing. And basically, they're ready to get him rotation, like in the rotation, and just have him be the third defensive tackler right now, which is a little surprising that they haven't gone out and got a veteran.
Yeah. That's great news because we're really light on, excuse the pun, on defensive tackles. It's kind of crazy that, we really haven't brought any other bodies in even to compete, especially when they knew Poona Ford and Jerron Reed were going to be out a few days of practice with a couple of lower leg things going on. Nothing serious. They're going to be great, but the camp is really light on defensive tackles right now. What are your thoughts on that? I've heard that, that Ford and Reed look great, but they missed the last couple of days. They mentioned, you mentioned Brian Monet, which is awesome. There's a kid by the name of Lattimore that's getting some reps in there, and then Christmas as well. But they don't really know too much about DeMarcus Christmas even because he missed the entire last year.
Yep.
And just sort of getting into it right now. So
actually, the stuff that I've, seen and heard is that Christmas is got a really good first step, and that it's kind of showing off in pass rush drills that he's really quick and the guards are struggling with him. And that's a good sign too. We'll see what happens when, they go full contact and everything, but at least in pass rush drills, he's looking good. So that's always a good development too, right? Because we didn't really have much expectation for him whatsoever, and for him to come in and look like a guy that they can, put in the rotations pretty good, but they still need someone else. I mean, if you have Reed or Ford out for at any period of time during the season, whether it be a game or three or whatever, who's your starters, right? You've got two guys that are starter caliber players, and that's it. and there is no Al Woods waiting to come on and play. There is no veteran backup, and this is a team that's always had, under Pete Carroll, always had that third defensive tackle that they could count on, and they just don't have it this year.
Yeah, Keith, I have to be completely honest. I'm a little worried. I'm worried about our trenches in general, both offense and defensive line. Later in the show today, we're going to talk about the offensive line go a little bit more into depth with those guys. But the defensive line, as camp has gone on, I'm less worried about the pass rush and more worried about the guys inside and stopping the run. Actually, where are we going to stop the run from? That would, to me, is a big question mark still. And here we are, not quite halfway through camp, but it's there's no real idea to me how the team is addressing that. Do you have any idea? I mean, just based on personnel.
All right, so that's an interesting question as far as like stopping the run, because what you've got here is you've got, we know Poona Ford can stop the run, right? I mean, he does his job as a nose tackle. He's pretty good with eating those blocks, trying to keep Bobby Wagner clean, all that kind of stuff. I think Brian Monet is going to be fine in that role too. He did pretty well when he was got snaps last year, and of course John Reed is John Reed. I mean, he can handle it. My concern is, what do we do after any kind of rotation? Because I know DeMarcus Christmas is not a guy with an anchor. He's going to get pushed around quite a bit. They're talking about moving Collier and Reed inside a lot, and they're going to get pushed around because they're pass rushers. They're defensive ends that are moving in because they provide additional pass rush on the inside. They're not big enough. They don't have the anchor to hold up against guards and centers and stop the run there. So if they're expecting all these pass rushers to be run stuffers, they're going to be in trouble. And I think what they've gotten into is they've gotten into a situation where Jerron Reed right now is the only player in the position group, in the rotation, that is capable of doing both. You've either got people who are just run stuffers like Ford and Monet, which I think they're going to be great at that, and that's not going to be an issue. But that's all they are. They don't offer you pass rush, and then you're expecting to sub them out and sub the pass rushers in there in those situations. And I think it's a lot of subbing in and out, trying to guess what the other team's going to do, because you don't have guys that are balanced and can do both. And I don't know if that is by design with the way the roster's put together, or if it's just the way it happens to be put together right now. But it does leave me concerned that, they're going to be having all these pass rushers in there trying to stop the run.
Yeah, I mean, it really wasn't that great last year, and that we had Clowney, and then we had Woods. I just don't know. I mean, Collier seems to be a guy that can play the 5 tech and stuff the run pretty good, maybe even better than Green when it's all said and done. But we just don't know at this point. Yeah. And then in the inside, like you said, after Poona Ford, there's nothing. You need to have another rotational piece. Now, maybe Brian Monet is the guy, and I just can't see that even if he's showing up early, I can't see the coaching staff be completely comfortable with counting on him to be the guy.
The lack of a preseason for them to go out and just see it on the field against an opposing team, and to have him show up and really just show it there and be like, yes, I can do this. Because it's one thing to show it in practice, where it's not completely full speed and all of that, but it's another thing to go out and do it in a game. And he's a completely unknown at this point. I mean, I love that Pete Carroll's mentioning him as showing up really well in practice, but do they want to risk going into week 1 with Monet as the guy, being the third defensive tackle? That sounds kind of scary to me.
So speaking of scary, let's stay on the defensive line really quick. Darrell Taylor shows up to camp. you're all excited about him. You really haven't heard too much in the offseason. I mean, we knew that he was kind of recouping from the surgery that he had and the rod he had placed in his leg in February. But we thought maybe he was going to be recovered and be ready for camp. Turns out not so much. He's on the PUP list, and it will be at least 2 more weeks, according to Pete Carroll, before he can get eased back into the deal. Coach said he wants Taylor to be a full go for at least 2 weeks before he can play. So they've got about 4 weeks left remaining before the first game kickoff. So he's got a couple of weeks where he can stay on the sidelines, but then he needs to be back in there in order for him to have any effect whatsoever on that pass rush. And it seemed like they were counting on him. Now, we can talk about Benson Mayowa a little bit as well. He's kind of been a standout in camp so far. But there's really not a lot there if Darrell Taylor can't go.
Well, I think the team definitely hedged its bets in the offseason as far as that, because I think they knew when they drafted him that health was going to be a thing at the beginning part of his rookie year. And so, because you've got Mayowa, you've also got Bruce Irvin, who's been getting reps there. Keem Griffin has kept in the rotation and in the mix for some pass rushing snaps on that side. And Robinson, the 5th round rookie, who has looked really good, very explosive, just very, very quick so far in camp. So I think between that group of guys, they can weather the storm of not having, their 2nd round pick, the guy they were expecting to hold that position down. They can weather that storm of not having him for a few weeks if they need to, because they've got a bunch of guys that you just need one of them to step up and show that they can be a starter, right? That they can handle the load. And it sounds like they've got, the team is pretty happy with what they're seeing.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. We've got a bunch of guys. I mean, there's just no question about that. And it's kind of cool to hear Pete Carroll mention Benson Mayowa, that he looks the part. He's exciting. He's fast. He's quick. He's kind of showing up. In 2019, Keith, just as a reminder for folks, 15 games, and in those 15 games, he had 30% of the snaps. He had 7 sacks, 10 QB hits, 5 tackles for losses, and 3 forced fumbles. And then you add Irvin to that, which he's coming off kind of a couple of career years as well, as kind of a pass rush specialist. And Alton Robinson, if that guy shows up, and then you add in Collier having a better year, Green. That's why I said earlier, I'm not so worried about the pass rush this year, the pressure rate. I think we're going to end up getting that. But I turned my attention now to kind of needing a defensive tackle, because one of Pete Carroll's pillars on defense is stopping the run. And if we can't do that and teams decide that they can just run on us, we're going to have a hard time getting off the field, which is not good. Especially, considering too, is that the Seahawks are really built on their 2nd and 3rd level this year. And if you're not going to protect your linebackers and your safeties to allow them freedom to not have to work through guards and tackles, that could be an issue. You could not maybe at the beginning of the year, but as the year goes on, you're wearing down guys like Bobby Wagner and rookie Jordan Brooks, who needs to get acclimated to the rigors of the NFL. It could be a long season, and so I really do believe they're probably not done yet acquiring a defensive tackle, at least for this defense. But there's not a lot out there right now.
No, I think they're sitting back at this point, waiting for a veteran salary cap casualty, someone who, basically another team that has a guy that has been a starter for a few years, but now they've got a young player that's taking over, and they're like, hey, we can save $8 million against the cap by cutting them. And we see those guys get cut in
True
at the end of training camp and stuff. But it does feel like they're just sitting back waiting and waiting and waiting. And at some point, how do you keep waiting? I mean, you need the player. You have to go get him, but they're not. He's not out there, not available.
The entire offseason strategy, Keith, wrapped around the pass rush and the defensive tackle group is a bit confounding to me, considering that it was probably the number one priority heading into the offseason. And yet here we are mid-August and it's still the number one priority. I don't get it. I mean, John Schneider and Pete Carroll, they're a tremendous tandem. They do, they're one of the best in the league. And I admire John Schneider, the way that he pulls off deals and acquires talent and the whole thing. But this is 2 years in a row. You know, it's perplexing. All right. Quentin Dunbar. Saw him in a uniform for the first time over the weekend. They're easing him back into it. It's his first week with the team. You saw Pete Carroll out there kind of giving him the little kick step schooling the other day, which is interesting. And then, but that does allow Trey Flowers to get first team reps still with the defense. And so I think overall it's an interesting strategy by the team, holding Quentin Dunbar back a little bit. So Trey Flowers gets the first team reps so that they kind of have that in their mind as they're now evaluating Quentin Dunbar as well and how the defense kind of pieces together. And I wrote this little thing on Twitter the other day. I was like, look at Trey Flowers. This kid, you know, he's heading into his third year. He's not going to just give up his starting role in this defense and sit by while another player comes in and takes his spot. I completely believe that this is going to be one of the most competitive roster spots battles in all of training camp this year. What do you think?
Well, I think ultimately the job will end up in Quentin Dunbar's hands. But you're right. I mean, Flowers has actually looked good and been kind of impressive there in camp so far. I mean, it's not a lot of time, but he is, you know, one of the guys that's done well. And given, you know, last year was kind of a struggle, but he looked really good as a rookie. So I think you have a situation where maybe he is finally starting to get comfortable and finally acclimating to the NFL and to his in a new position too. And maybe he's ready to do it. And what that means then is that you're going to have three guys that you trust to start if Flowers really has taken that next step. And that would be incredible. I mean, one guy goes down with an injury and, oh, look, we plugged in another starter and nobody noticed. That would be kind of cool. But I do think the job will be Quentin Dunbar's to have and to hold down, because last year he was one of the best corners in the league at coverage. I mean, he just was. And I think that Flowers taking another step might get him, you know, into the conversation, but I don't think he's going to step over one of the best corners in the league. So it does, the position in my mind still belongs to Dunbar until I see otherwise.
Interesting. And then you throw Marquise Blair into that kind of equation, sharing reps right now at nickel with Amadi, Carroll's off-season plan. So back in, I think it was February or March, Carroll gave a news conference, I think wrapped around the combine, or maybe it was a pre-draft kind of a presser. And he was talking about they're working on a plan in the secondary this year, and they don't really want to talk about it yet. They're still working on it. And they want to see how it goes. This is Carroll's plan. It's all about Marquise Blair and about getting the best players on the field. And so now you add Blair to the equation of Flowers. You've still got Amadi there as well. And then you add Dunbar, and you've got Adams here, and then Griffin, and then Diggs. My goodness, Keith, we are so loaded in the secondary. We talked about it all last week, but I still marvel at it every time I mention all those names in the same sentence. It's crazy. How do you think that Marquise Blair, I mean, to me, the Marquise Blair gives you so much roster flexibility when you combine it with everyone else, because if he's in the nickel, but yet he's got the ability to blitz, he's got the ability to come up and play, kind of a strong safety role up there, if you will. And then he also has the ability, given his speed, to be able to drop back into coverage. And I just this defense has so much upside potential. It's crazy to me.
Well, and then you also throw in Adams, who's also that way. He's also a guy that can play literally every position but defensive tackle on a defense. And, now you've got, Blair that can come in and you can take both of those guys and you can move them all over and you can really do some things to confuse opposing teams. And I think that having that would be just really fun if I was coordinating a defense and just coming up with cool ways to do stuff. One of the things that I did note was that Blair has been the primary nickel defensive back. They've been going with the big nickel and the extra safety more than they've been going with the small nickel and bringing in a corner, which Wiz Amadi as the starter in that role. Both of those things are expected, having it be those two guys, but just to see it happen and to have them go big nickel more often is one of those things we've kind of been waiting for, kind of been expecting the last couple of years, and it just hasn't happened. And they talk about it, and we look at schematically, and we go, God, that makes sense. They should do that, and then it doesn't happen. And I think it was really just the team not feeling overly confident about the talent that they had, and trying to get the people out there. And now they seem to be actually doing it. Because they are getting Blair in there as the nickel. They go with the big nickel package, and when you're playing a lot of zone, which this team does, you don't lose a lot of coverage by going with the big nickel, but you can gain a lot of versatility and run support and that kind of stuff. So it's interesting. We'll see how this progresses through camp and into the season, but right now it's a fun little wrinkle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as far as Jamal Adams is concerned, I just saw an interview that he did a few days ago. I mean, he's definitely the new alpha of the defense too, by the way. Unbelievable. Had a nice pick six yesterday out of the red zone, took it all the way back to the house. Not that it counts, but nonetheless, he made a nice play on the ball. He talked about Pete letting him roam this year. He used that specific word, roam, so that he can be a more of a ball hawk. He only had a couple interceptions in his entire career, but he's got a heck of a lot of sacks and plays behind the backfield, tackles for loss, forced fumbles, all that kind of stuff. But Pete wants him to be a ball hawk this year and generate turnovers with interceptions, essentially, or causing interceptions, intercepting the ball himself, etc. I found that to be a very interesting quote because we didn't know, based on the way that the Jets used him and Greg Williams, where he was kind of playing 5 or 6 different positions all year, everything almost but strong safety, right? And we heard going into camp that Pete was going to settle him down into the strong safety role. And we thought, well, what is that going to do to all his athleticism and et cetera? It sounds like it's going to be kind of in name only. And they're still going to allow him to kind of dictate where he lines up on the field to put himself in the best position to make plays, which is exciting to me. Now, that might cause a couple of mistakes, but in the long run, you're hoping that athleticism generates more plays than it gives up for sure.
Well, the Seahawks did a very similar thing with Cam Chancellor. He was, he roamed all over. I mean, there were times he was up on the line of scrimmage and other times where he was back deep, and they moved him around, and really he moved himself around. And one of the things that you go back and when you watch pre-snap, when it was Cam, was how much he communicated with the linebackers pre-snap so that everyone knew where he was and what was going on so that there wasn't lapses because, the play diagram has a strong safety lined up, on the strong side over the tight end, and there's Chancellor over on the weak side, and you're like, well, that's going to leave a hole, right? But then he talks to the linebackers, and everyone kind of shifts a little bit, shifts one gap over, and they don't have those lanes that are unassigned. And hopefully with Adams, they can get to that situation where you've got a guy that communicates really well. You got linebackers who are smart and they move and they shift and they adapt to the situations. I always thought it was weird that you've got, you'd see all 3 linebackers look to the strong safety and him giving signals and doing calls. And I'm like, you got Bobby Wagner, who does all the defensive calls and everything for the front, for the whole thing there, and he's an all-pro, and yet he and the other two guys are looking to the strong safety for these signals, and it was always weird, but what it did was it allowed Cam to move around, and set himself up to make plays and to find ways to exploit what the offense was doing and really take it to him. And with Adams, you've got a guy who's not as big as Cam, but is faster, more athletic, and
you could argue that it has more ability to move around the field and make plays. Now Cam was great, but
Cam was
a pretty
amazing,
big guy, and he wasn't as quick as Adams for sure.
Yep.
And so it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I'm excited. I mean, the whole defense is going to be pretty interesting to watch.
Yeah, we'll see if Adams is capable of manhandling an offensive tackle the way Cam did, because you got to admit that is a very unique trait for safety.
I don't think that Adams will be the one to be manhandling a tackle, but he could jump over him, and that'll be fun to watch.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the last player I wanted to talk about that isn't an offensive lineman that we're going to get to in just a sec is Cody Thompson. So I knew that he was on the practice squad last year. This is a wide receiver. It's a guy that we've never talked about on the show before, and a guy that seems to be hanging around a little bit, and I just don't know what Cody Thompson is all about. And he's getting to be the talk of camp as far as a guy that's going up and making plays, high pointing the ball, kind of making himself stand out, which is all you can ask for a guy that's fighting for the fifth or sixth spot on the roster. So it'll be an interesting name to watch as camp progresses. Cody Thompson, like you said earlier about not having any games to be able to evaluate. This is where a situation like this hurts Cody Thompson, is that he's a great camp guy, practice guy, but is he a gamer? You can't find out until you actually play a game.
True, but it's also a situation where he also isn't showing for other teams what he can do during the preseason. So if he ends up not making the roster, he goes onto the practice squad, which means now he's waiting for an injury, for an opportunity to actually get into games and show. But it does mean that he stays in town and the depth stays here. And I do think that getting guys through waivers to the practice squad is going to be way easier this year because teams haven't had a chance to evaluate.
Every team's in the same boat.
Right, yeah. I mean, you haven't had a chance to evaluate the depth of other teams because there's no preseason tape to watch. So I think that a situation like that, you could get a guy through who maybe
that's going to be very good. That's going to be a very big situation with Anthony Gordon, I think. I've already heard G. Scott come out and say that he believes that Anthony Gordon, based on what he's seen, should have a legit opportunity to be the number 2 backup for the Seahawks. And he's not going to get that opportunity. I don't think. It would be crazy for Pete Carroll, coached team, to take an undrafted rookie free agent quarterback and put him in as the number 2 guy over Geno Smith. Not this year. It's just not going to happen. So,
well, they did that with B.J. Daniels, right? So they had an undrafted rookie as Russell Wilson's backup. And then he was actually there for a second year too. So it's not completely unheard of, but I think you're looking at a situation where it's going to be Geno's job and Gordon's going to end up on the practice squad, probably protected there. And we'll see what he does. It's one thing to look really good in practice when you have basically, if you're touched, someone else is getting in trouble. Because you know that no one will hit you, no one will touch you.
What are the protection rules this year for the practice squad? So I know that the initial cut down, the week before the first game, all the players that are cut have to make it through a 24-hour window before they end up being able to be signed onto the practice squad. Is that the only vulnerable time that the Seahawks have to worry about with Anthony Gordon?
Yep, that's the point. Is so there is, in order to get them onto the practice squad, you have to waive them off the roster. When you waive them, they go onto waivers for 24 hours, and another team can claim them. But if you claim them, you have to put them on your 53. You can't put them on your practice squad. And so, yeah, that 24 hours is the window. But is another team going to claim him and put him on their 53 as their backup quarterback when they've never seen him play in the NFL? There's no preseason tape for him or anything. The last thing that all these teams had is his college tape, which they thought well enough of him for him to go undrafted, right? Even though the skills were present, there were also some gaping holes in his game that mainly his footwork and in pocket stuff. But as a whole, the league thought highly enough of him to not draft him. And without a preseason game, without a chance for him to show development, no one's going to pluck him off waivers and stick him as their backup. That doesn't make any sense.
The only concern is there are still a few teams out there that carry 3 quarterbacks. And if he's the best option at a third quarterback role for one of those teams, a team could pick him off and put him on the roster. Now, I'm not going to say it's going to happen. I'm just saying that would be the only concern. Otherwise, they get him to the practice squad, and they can. I think after that, they can protect him. I think the rules state that you can protect a player for up to 2 or 3 games in a row, but then you can't protect him for the next week. And then,
you can't just leave him as protected on the practice squad all year.
Right. So they're going to have to kind of move him around a little bit, maybe activate him one game, deactivate him, etc. I don't know how that's going to work, but if that came to that, now maybe they just don't care, and he's not the prospect that everyone thinks he might be, and they just ended up moving on from him. Who knows, right? They've done that in the past as well. So you just without seeing him in games, it's going to be very difficult to know exactly where he's at in the system.
The only 2 teams that I would be concerned about possibly trying to poach him would be Arizona, because they are running a version of the offense that Gordon ran in college, right? Which is, the Mike Leach air raid. And then the other one would be Jacksonville, because the player who Gordon replaced as the starting quarterback at Washington State is the starting quarterback in Jacksonville. So as Minshew graduated, left, went to Jacksonville. Gordon got the starting job, and so it became a situation where, obviously they have some similar skill sets and similar experience and that kind of stuff. So I could see those 2 teams possibly taking a look at him, but I honestly don't think any other team is going to take the risk of going and getting that guy in a situation where there's no preseason games to evaluate him.
It'll be interesting to see if they really fall in love with him. Like if he just end up being one of those guys, at what lengths that they will go to protect him. Like, will they put him on the injured list? Will they, whatever it takes, I would imagine that they will keep him on the roster, even if they had to forego some sort of Nick Ballure situation. Okay. Let's talk offensive line. This is the part of the show where you come alive, your eyes sparkle, and your smile is broad, and we start talking big beefy guys.
And we start talking offensive linemen and guys who block and people who most fans don't know their name, and everyone else's eyes glaze over, and I'm like, yay, offensive line. Can we talk about zone blocking? And, scheme. And I don't know how this became my thing, but it totally is my thing. So the offensive line,
you say
it scares you. It scares you really badly, doesn't it?
No, yeah, kind of. The Seahawks allowed 48 sacks last year, led the entire league. They were kind of poor at run blocking, although Chris Carson overcame that just because he's so damn good at breaking tackles and gaining yards after first contact. And then the pass rushing, the pass blocking, it was okay. I mean, Dwayne Brown definitely had a positive grade, but then everyone else graded below 60.
And even Dwayne Brown
Pro
had an
Football
off year
Focus.
because of his bicep
Yeah.
injury. I mean, that was not typical Dwayne Brown year, because he battled injuries all year. So, but let's face it, that the line last year wasn't good. They weren't good at pass blocking. They weren't good at run blocking. They were they had a couple of people who were really good at penalties that would kill drives. They had someone as a starter for half the season who was really good at being pushed straight back onto his butt and in Russell Wilson's face, and that was his primary attribute, I guess. And
Joey Hunt.
Yeah, the line was bad, right? So we talk about, oh, well, we lost this guy, we lost that guy, we cut this. Doesn't matter. You lost someone who was bad.
Well,
right?
let's talk about that. I mean, let's talk about what we lost and what we gained. And then, Pete Carroll's primary concern, heading into the offseason was continuity. Well, we have anything but that.
I don't know if that was actually true. He talks about continuity, and the first thing, like before he's even done giving the interview, they're already cutting people.
Let me ask you this. What is your philosophy on continuity on offensive lines in general?
I think that continuity matters when you've got players in place that are worth playing, and I don't think that was the case last year. Right? It doesn't matter if you keep running Effetti out there week in, week out for continuity. He's going to be bad no matter what you do. So you're better off putting in a player with talent that can develop continuity over time, right? And so that was my thing. You have to have the right guys before you start worrying about it. If you're just like, oh, we need continuity, we need that communication, we need all of those things, okay, that's fine. But start with players that are worth developing that with. And I don't think the Seahawks had that a year ago. I mean, are you really worried about continuity and keeping guys in place when you've got Joey Hunt and Effetti out there? I mean, these are guys that just straight up aren't good. You can give them all the reps and all the, ability to work with the guys around them and everything, all you want, and they're never going to actually be good at their job. So,
okay, so you're absolutely right. So the team kind of took care of that in their own way this year. Britt is no longer with the team. Fluker's moved on, and Effetti is gone. Mm-hmm. In their place, we signed B.J. Finney to a 2-year contract. He's a center from Pittsburgh in free agency. And then we signed Brandon Shell at right tackle, 6'5", 324, 2016 5th-round pick overall. He's 28 years old. As far as grading is concerned, he's on par with Effetti minus a few of the penalties, although he was penalized a fair enough amount of times. And then we drafted Damian Lewis and to be Fluker's replacement at right guard. And then remaining, we've got, obviously, we just talked about Dwayne Brown, and then Mike Upati at left guard they retained him for another year.
Well, and he's fighting for his job too, because he's getting pushed by Phil Hayes and Jordan Simmons, both guys that are also getting reps at right guard, and they're pushing for time too. I mean, we got to remember that last year Hayes was thought of as kind of the future at left guard, and was going to be that guy, and just had off season injury stuff that just kind of nagged him, and he never really got an opportunity.
He had hernia surgery.
Yeah, and so it was a situation where he never really got his chance to compete because of that, and he did get to play in the playoffs and looked okay and all of that, but this is his first opportunity to come in and really show that he belongs on the field and not on the sideline. And so far, it sounds like he's taken advantage of it.
Yeah, and
So
he
we'll
will
see.
get an opportunity. Mike Upati has not played more than 14 games, I think, in this. Maybe he played 15 last year. He actually had a pretty decent year as far as injuries is concerned. A couple of nagging things, but overall, okay, decent wise. But
But even
last
then,
year
he missed time during the games.
Well, last year he had 1,000 snaps. 8 penalties, 5 sacks allowed. Pro Football Focus grade of 60.3. And he missed the playoffs due to a neck injury. So to me, I think Mike Upati is the most overrated guy on the line. Now we brought him back just because I think we needed some sort of a veteran presence over there, and he was the best option that the Seahawks felt like they could bring in without having to spend any money. And then you and I both are probably hoping Phil Haynes takes that spot. But then what do you do with Upati, and then what happens to your depth? So that'll be an interesting thing. But to me, you look at that offensive line: Dwayne Brown, Upati, Finney, Lewis, Brandon Shell. I have to be completely honest, Keith. The only person that I'm really comfortable with on that offensive line, even including Dwayne Brown, because he's getting older and maybe susceptible to injury, is Damian Lewis. Damian Lewis is a guy. He's a rookie, but he looks the part, and I think he's going to fit right in seamlessly and be good out of the gate. It just seems like all indications are that that's the case. But you look at Brandon Shell, he's got his own issues. In 2019, he had 800 snaps, 5 penalties, 7 sacks allowed, Pro Football Focus grade of 63.6, ranked 54 out of 80 some odd offensive tackles in 2019. And then there's really nothing behind Brandon Shell to as far as depth. I think we've got
there's Cedric Abuhi.
Yes, and he's getting reps at left tackle too, by the way, because they're resting.
He's getting reps at both tackle spots. He looks very much like he's going to be the swing tackle.
Well, before you get into backups, let me ask you what your opinion is of of the proposed starting five.
I think you're under selling BJ Finney, who has looked very good at multiple spots on the interior of the offensive line over his career. He only
played 325 snaps in 2019 and only has 12 starts out of 47 games or something like that.
True, but he still got on the field and played at guard, played at center, and has looked good when he was out there. So when he was signed, he was the starting center. The moment they signed him, we knew Justin Britt was gone.
Maybe. So check this out, though. His cap number for 2020 is $3.5 million. Is that a starting center's salary, or is that a key reserve salary? His starting salary in 2021 is $4.5 million. So these are numbers that aren't outrageous for a starting center at all. In fact, the lower third of the league. After looking it up, I have a question for you. At what point does Ethan Posick have the upper hand to be the starter at center this year over BJ Finney?
He doesn't.
He almost made it last year before getting injured. He has a chance.
He did not get. He almost made it as the starting left guard. As the starting
but
center.
Now he's the primary center. They've said it out loud at camp. He's the guy.
He's the backup. He's the guy. He's the guy replacing Joey Hunt because Joey Hunt was so ineffective. They've moved him into center. They want him focusing on center and all of that. But he's a guy that can play all 3 interior line positions and play them well.
That is a key point.
Which makes him valuable as a reserve. Finney is signed.
BJ Finney can play guard as well.
True, but Finney is he's not going anywhere, his contract wise, and let's face it, he's a better player at this point. And he's more experienced. He's more of a veteran. He's going to get the line calls.
All of that is true.
Worry about that. And if you end up needing, Finney's going to play. He's going to be the starter, and I am not. I know you're bringing this up and trying to create debate.
BJ Finney only has 32-inch arms.
Debate. So what?
Yeah.
Who cares?
It doesn't really fit he doesn't really fit the athletic profile.
It does not matter at center. Now, if you add
it mattered to Joey Hunt.
No, it didn't.
Joey Hunt had short arms too.
Yeah, that wasn't the reason why Joey Hunt ended up on his ass every third snap.
Well, I'll give you that. BJ Finney has way better lower body strength than Joey Hunt could hope for.
He's got a better anchor. He's got better technique.
I think Ethan Postic's in the conversation and will remain in the conversation for that starting role, not just a reserve role, that starting role up until the week of the beginning of the year.
I don't agree entirely because Ethan Postic at no point in his career has managed to stay healthy, and BJ Finney hasn't really had an injury problem. So they're gonna go with the guy that's more durable since they're expecting someone to play 16 games, and they're gonna have the other guy be the backup. I really think that's where they're gonna roll with. And Postic's going to go there. I don't even think this is that much of a competition at this point. Finney's he's been getting the reps with the ones, and he's kind of like when they signed him to be the starter, and he's an upgrade over Justin Britt. I know we keep talking about that he was bad.
I don't know,
or he is an upgrade. Justin Britt was not a great player.
Justin Britt was a pretty decent run blocker, not a very good pass blocker. It's just the opposite with Finney. Finney's known to be a pretty decent pass blocker and not a very good run blocker. I'm wondering if that will matter to the Seahawks, and that's why Ethan Postic might have an advantage.
See, here's one of the things that I would warn you with that is he was coming from Pittsburgh, right? Pittsburgh does not run the same zone concepts that Seattle does in the run game, and so what Finney does well is what made him a good pass blocker is his movement, his ability to move his feet, his ability to stay in front of people, and all that kind of stuff. When you look at what he's going to be asked to do in the run game, where he's going to be asked to engage a defensive tackle and then release and get up on a linebacker and do all these things in motion and while moving. These are things that he's going to do well. So he's going to do better at that than he did in Pittsburgh, where they'd had a much more of a man blocking scheme where he was just asked to block the guy in front of him, and that's it, and not block in space and that kind of stuff. So his talent fits what Seattle wants to do in the run game better than it fit what Pittsburgh wanted to do in the run game. So yes, he's a good pass blocker, and that's something that this team has needed, and they haven't had in the Justin Britt era,
especially in the interior. Yeah,
yeah, but you're going to find that he's a better run blocker than advertised because Seattle's scheme fits him so much better than Pittsburgh's did.
Yeah, I mean, as long as he doesn't get blocked into a hole, I'm good. Let's talk about left tackle for a half second. So Dwayne Brown is the starter. In fact, the hope is, based on the fact that we looked at everything else, that he's the starter for at least the next 2 years, because my problem isn't with Brown at all. My problem is that Brown will turn 35 this year, and the Seahawks don't have a replacement level player on the roster and 0 first-round picks in the next 2 drafts. To me, that's a concern. And you'd mentioned Cedric Abuahe a few minutes ago as being, it looks like now, the primary swing tackle on this roster. What's your comfort level here?
My comfort level with Brown is good. I am very uncomfortable with Abuahe and the likelihood that the team is going to need Abuahe to play because of Brown's age, and he does get banged up and miss a game here or there. And so to go into any game without your starting left tackle is bad, but the drop off from Brown to Abuahe is extra.
Or Jamarco Jones,
who was who actually doesn't appear to be in the mix at left tackle this year. He's getting some reps on the right side. He's
and inside.
And in the interior, which I think those are things that are going to fit his skill set. And there was a point a couple of years ago where he was on the verge of unseating Affetti as a starting right tackle, and then he got hurt and missed a whole year, and then came back last year and looked really good at guard, like really good at guard. They moved him out to left tackle for one game, and it was a disaster. Such a disaster that in the next game, George Fant got the start at left tackle, and it was better. So I don't consider him in that mix there, and it doesn't look like the team is either because he's not getting reps there. It's really Abuhi and some undrafted guys at left tackle, and that's a scary combination. When you've got a guy like Dwayne Brown who's older and misses games occasionally. And
that trend will probably only go up. I mean, you got a guy like Whitworth out there as a tackle that's into his 40s now as a starting left tackle in the NFL, and then there's no stats that point to Dwayne Brown being able to do the same thing. They're two individual players. You can't really compare them. Dwayne Brown's obviously had a great long run without a lot of injury history at all, but he had a couple things going on last year. He played in 793 snaps out of a possible around 1,100 snaps total. So he missed about 300 snaps, excuse me. And he was great. I mean, he had 2 penalties out of that and 1 sack. He did have a lower Pro Football Focus grade of 74.1 this last year when you factored in run blocking and pass blocking.
He was dealing with a really serious bicep injury.
Yeah, but still top 20 left tackle in the NFL.
Yeah, and dealing with a serious injury. And so I'm not. He played through that, you know what I mean? And
he did play through that.
And still was decent. And so now he's healthy. And I expect him to be back being Dwayne Brown and playing at a Pro Bowl level for a good chunk of the season. But I don't expect him to be the Dwayne Brown from a few years ago for 16 games. I hope that we get him at that level for 8 and maybe 4 or 5 more at what we saw last year as he gets, nicked up and whatever. And then you're hoping that he's healthy and ready for the playoffs. That sounds less than
promising.
And what concerns me is just the lack of the backup. Last year, I know they went with Jones that first game because he had shown so well at guard. It was kind of like he'd earned it. But the guy that gave me peace of mind was the fact that George Fant was on the roster. And he came in and performed admirably and actually turned those couple of games that he played at left tackle into a fairly lucrative contract.
Yes, he did. And hats off to him. Now, the Jets fans are going crazy. They're like, what? The what? Because, George Fant. And they gave him $10 million, and he's their presumptive, starter at tackle. So we'll see what happens there. But good on him.
Yeah, and but I don't see there's just not a guy like George Fant on the roster that gives me peace of mind.
But that's only because we haven't seen Cedric Abuhi yet. We haven't seen him. We haven't heard enough about him.
We haven't seen him in a Seattle uniform, but we've seen him. He's not a guy that's just
he's a starter guy that started for the Titans for 3 years. I mean, this is not a schmuck guy. He got a couple of injuries this last couple of years, kept him off, any starting role at all, and was a kind of a backup that really didn't get any time. So he's still out there now. The upside opportunity for him here is obvious, and the things that are being said out of camp so far about Cedric Abuhi, specifically Coach Carroll, is that he looks the part. He's showing up. He's quick. He's active on his feet. He's getting the reps for left tackle Dwayne Brown right now when they rest Dwayne Brown, and it sounds like they're counting on him to be the guy. Not the guy, but the key swing tackle backup on the roster, which is interesting to me. I think if that's the case and they feel like they don't need to go out and get another guy off a practice squad or whatever, I'm okay with that.
I would caution you about taking all of Pete Carroll's praise at this time of year at face value, because it's Pete, right? He loves everything. There is nothing that's ever happened on a football field that he's not excited and amped about.
True, but he does really only mention players without being prompted if they really do stand out to him.
Another player that he has mentioned without being prompted that stood out to him was right tackle Brandon Shell. And his comment was that there really hasn't been a thing about him that hasn't looked good. He's really consistent, and he's physical enough to be dominant.
Wow. Those were his words?
Those are Pete Carroll's words on Brandon Shell.
I did not see that quote. That's pretty sweet.
Now, I saw that, and I'm like, okay, good. That means he's coming out and he's showing. And I think that's great for him. But I take Pete Carroll's words during training camp with a grain of salt, because he's Pete Carroll. And it's not that he's lying. It's just that he's just naturally positive about everything. When was the last time he came out and really had something negative to say about anything? I don't remember. And I love that about Pete. Don't get me wrong. I'm not like, this isn't like a thing where I'm like, oh, whatever. It's just because Pete is praising someone doesn't mean that we can just be like, oh, they're going to be great this year. Because he praises everyone at some point. But if Abuhi has looked as good as Pete says he has, and Shell has looked as good as Pete says he has, then we have no concern on the offensive line. Because the interior is set, it's solid, it's deep. Finney's better than you were giving him credit for. Postic's probably better than I am giving him credit for.
Jordan Simmons. You got to worry about health with Jordan Simmons, but he's a guy that can actually play.
Yeah, I mean, Simmons is a guy that most people don't remember him, but a couple of years ago, he ended up coming in as a starter for a few games and looked really good, and then he got hurt. And so, you look at that. Postic's done that. He's done that. We got Hayes, who looked okay in the playoffs, but also has all the physical tools to be very good there. Damian Lewis, who's the rookie, who is basically, he's a younger, less injury-prone DJ Fluker. He's a guy that you just have to kind of pencil in, because he's like the prototype for a right guard in the Mike Solari system here. The interior of the line, I mean, I know that these might be not names that are household names everywhere, but they're solid. There's some depth there. I didn't even mention Jamarco Jones, who's probably the best guard in the group.
That's true.
And
let me ask you this. So Chance Warmack was another name that initially was with us in the offseason, but opted out. COVID opted out. Mm-hmm. I really had an inkling of an idea that he might have put himself into play for that left guard spot as well, along with Haynes. And certainly a key backup, and then he's off the roster, so that did lessen the overall guard depth a little bit. And then as far as
I just didn't think he was going to make the. I didn't think he was going to make the roster.
Yeah, it depends on where his head and heart was, because
he was coming in to try and basically revitalize a career, because he was a first-round pick who kind of flamed out, and then had a bunch of injuries, and then hasn't been in football, and was just trying to get back into the league. Right. And then he got an opportunity to opt out
for $150,000. Right.
Yeah. So rather than try and compete for that job, so where was his head and heart?
Exactly. It turned out. Now, I'm not going to criticize anybody for opting out for COVID because
no, not at all. But it does
nonetheless.
it does kind of make me wonder. And I see all younger players with way more upside that I think you're not taking a risk on. Keeping Phil Hayes on the roster, but I think you are taking a risk keeping Chance Warmack on the roster because he just hasn't even he was just trying to get back into the league, which tells you something. I didn't have him on my projected roster, and it would have been cool if he came in, showed up, showed why he was a first round pick, and they go, whoa, they got a starter for nothing. And I think that's what the team thought is this was a no risk signing because there's no guaranteed money. There's no dead money to cut him or anything. And the potential, since it was there's no risk, is that he comes in and looks great, looks dominant. You throw him out there and you roll with it. But I also think that the chances of him making the roster were low. And so to me, he never really factored into my opinion of the offensive line or its depth. And maybe that's on me and I should have, but I didn't. And so it doesn't change my opinion now that he's gone because he was never really there. I like the interior line. I like the interior depth. I know there's going to be some missed blocks and some growing pains, whether it's Lewis or Hayes or, any of the young guys, Simmons, that end up as the starter, or even if it's Lupati, you're going to have some missed blocks and some penalties and that kind of stuff too. Just being the veteran doesn't, make it better. So you have there's going to be some of that, but the depth is there. If somebody gets hurt, there's someone else ready to step in. You've got overall good talent that needs experience. It needs seasoning. They need to pick one and get some continuity. But I like the interior line. I really do. The tackles, I like Dwayne Brown, but I know he's getting older and has been banged up a little bit the last couple of years. I want to give Brendan Shell a chance because I think the talent is there. His footwork is way better than Ifedi's was. For him, it was a matter of, could he generate some play strength in the running game? And we'll see how that looks this year. But behind the two of them.
Yeah, let's talk about the back end, the two other reserve guys.
You've got Cedric Abuihi, who's going to be the swing guy. And then you've got a couple of guys that honestly, they're just undrafted free agents.
Chad Wheeler's been hanging around a little bit in the league.
He's not a rookie, right. But he's hung around the league on practice squads.
Correct. And then Tommy Champion's brand new to the team, Mississippi State, 6'5", 320. But he really only saw action in like 8-9 games his entire college career. This is a guy that's even was not a starter at the college level at Mississippi State. You've got to really take a look at that. They must really like his athletic profile, and they just want to take a look at him. But
he's a massive project. But at the same time, what they might end up doing with him is groom him to be in the George Fant role where he plays more tight end than tackle. And if he makes the roster, I'm sure it will be with that in mind that he is going to be, way down on the depth chart as far as actually playing tackle, but useful at tight end as a blocker in case that. But with Disley and Olsen on the roster this year, I don't see the value there. So we'll see. I just really don't like the depth at tackle. I like the depth on the interior. I think that...
Yeah. It wouldn't shock me if we pick somebody up. This is another, absolutely. Like I said, we talked about the defensive tackle situation. I think it's a similar situation on the offensive line as far as the depth. Just one more guy that's got a little bit more upside than Wheeler and Champion and maybe a guy like... now, I know everyone likes Jones, and I do too, but Jamarco Jones has shown that he does have certain limitations. and maybe they decide to go with a guy that's got a little bit more well-rounded game than Jones. I'm not sure, because I mean, there is a lot to like there, but he showed his athletic limitations there with being able to get the kick step outside to protect speed rusher.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that belongs on the right side if he's going to play tackle, where he has protection.
And he's small for that spot, traditionally.
Yep. And but he's a guy that's shown extremely well at guard, and I think his natural physical skill set actually projects as a guard.
And it's interesting because typically under Solari, his guards are mammoth. You know, you're looking at guys that are 330 minimum, and Jamarco Jones does not fit that bill. In fact, the team has Jamarco Jones listed below 300 pounds right now on the roster.
Wow, I did not realize they had him listed that low. Because he's a guy whose play weight's like 305, 307. And, that's where he was last year. And he, in the first start of his career, he got lined up against possibly the best defensive player in the league, in Aaron Donald. And he didn't, I don't want to say he dominated Donald, but he held his own against Aaron Donald, and nobody does that.
True.
Nobody matches up against Donald and doesn't allow Donald to dominate. And Jones did a great job. And if you can hold your own against the best defensive tackle in the NFL, I'm sorry, you're starter material. And he did that. He looked great there. I was surprised that he didn't stay as a starter, but they chose to, bring Fluker back in and let him play and all of that. But he belongs inside. He can do the job. He's good in there. And I know that Solari wants big, massive guys who can push those defensive tackles back and win those battles on the interior, rather than, the guys that are middle of the road size and more mobile. I know that's more of an outside zone makeup of for a guard than an inside zone, which is what the Seahawks run. But I was very pleasantly surprised and happy with the performance Jones had as an interior lineman last year. I would love to see the team leave him there and only use him at right tackle if they have to, and just leave it at that. He's an interior guy and an emergency right tackle. I would keep him off the left side at all costs if they can.
So I think that's it. I mean, do you have anything else you want to cover today in today's show? Any other topics? Otherwise, what's coming up with camp in the next week or so?
Yeah, I mean, we've got obviously some more practices. We got padded practices that we get to watch. There's not many of them, the way that training camp set up this year, and so those are the ones where
I think there's an actual scrimmage too coming up on the 25th, maybe from CenturyLink Field.
And I was going to say it's on CenturyLink Field. They're doing it there. There won't be fans, but it will be out there, on the field turf, and they'll run a scrimmage like they usually do a mock game at that point in a normal training camp, a non-COVID training camp, where you match up, the number ones versus the number twos, both offense and defense, and so they get a chance to do their thing and all of that, and we're gonna get a chance to see two of those this year because of the lack of preseason, but they're gonna be at CenturyLink. They're supposed to be streamed live for us. We'll see if the team adheres to that or if they decide to shut it down so that way they can run plays and not have it be scouting material for opponents. But at this point, I'd love to see it. I'm really looking forward to a chance to see them get out and play in some live action situations.
Yeah. And Pete mentioned too that they would do a little bit more contact this year towards the end of camp or after camp breaks before the regular season. So I don't know if we'll actually see that as far as what the filming portion of camp. Usually the filmed portion of training camp when it's on Seahawks.com is the first hour, which is generally warm-ups and run-throughs and soft drills before they actually get into anything at all. So
it's position drills. The most that we would typically get on the feed is the 7-on-7s, so no offensive and defensive line. When they go to 11-on-11s, they turn it off.
Yes.
And if they go to 11-on-11s early in practice for some reason, even if they're scheduled to be on for an hour, they shut it off. And that's like the one thing they won't show us.
Makes sense.
So, which was always the advantage of being able to go, whether you're sitting on the berm or on the sideline, and watch, because you get a lot of useful information from the 11-on-11.
Well, and they've even instructed all their beat reporters to not be able to report anything after that hour as well. So so it is what it is, and it's this way every year, and we just have to kind of put up with it. And then the games come, and we forget about it. So, there's nothing else for right now. So let's go through the week. We'll come back next week, and we'll talk about whatever's going on, and we'll come up with a main topic, at some point, and we'll shoot that around.
We'll see what happens over the next week.
So, okay. So we are going to come back next week, and we'll be on again, and we're glad to have you join us, and look forward to being back on the show with you, Keith. And so follow Keith on Twitter at MyersNFL. I'm at NWChawk. The show is at Hawks Playbook on Twitter. Seahawksplaybook.com has all of the shows where you can listen and subscribe, and make sure if you don't go to the website, you're listening on your favorite podcast app, and subscribe there as well so you don't miss anything when we put it out each week. So until next time, Keith, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NWChawk, Keith is at MyersNFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.